Hi, I'm Bob Hoster. A little bit about myself. I've been with SEK since 2013. I have over 38 years of audit experience. My specialization is in internal audit and IT security controls. And I assist the firm with audits of some of their government and non-for-profit clients in reviewing IT controls and IT security. My presentation today is about the potential impact that COVID-19 may have had on your organization's IT controls. And I also wanted to just cover some IT security considerations since we are now going to a more remote-based work model for your employees. So we're going to cover some considerations related to that. COVID-19 has impact on many organizations, which has resulted in increased remote working by employees. In addition, it might have also resulted in furloughs and workforce reductions. These above impacts have affected the following areas: IT security, impacted the responsibility and execution of internal controls. It might have impacted segregation of duties, especially if you had furloughs and workforce reductions. It might have affected the timeliness of internal control execution. And it might have had an impact on internal controls that you typically might have been performing on site at your organization. So we're going to cover a few of these considerations going forward. First, for IT security, everyone in most organizations had to substantiate and set up some kind of remote working arrangement, which resulted in a lot of workers becoming remote and having to have VPN access to your systems in order to perform their responsibilities. The key thing to consider here is to evaluate if your remote workers are working with what they call regulated data or data privacy. And it's important that they understand that they have training on how to handle that data when working from home, especially with their printing from home and they're disposing of private information that your company has at home. They should either have some type of control there, either shredders or have some kind of disposal to privately dispose of that type of data that they may be working with at home. Second consideration is changes in user additions, removals, and access of users. With all the different people removing to remote, it might have required additional access approvals at your organization. And it's still important to remember that we have appropriate validation of those users who are remote to ensure that the access they are being granted is what is proper for them in order to perform their jobs. The third consideration is key applications and systems. Typically, access to these were granted to people that normally would be working with like your general ledger, your payroll, and other sensitive areas in your financial applications. But with remote access, this might have caused more access to be granted to other individuals that normally would not have this access. So it's important to make sure that you have the appropriate security set up for the additional access that you granted to these applications for those people that previously may not have had that. It's consideration to make sure that they can only access the information that they need to have in order to perform their jobs. Even if you have increased security on your key applications, it's also important to set up some type of multi-factor authentication in making sure that remote workers have to access your systems through a dual method. This might be through Duo or maybe some other authentication factor to ensure that the person that's accessing the system is that worker. Another consideration is contractors and vendors. Typically, vendors who might have been working on site for you that had access to your systems, they obviously would probably, in order to perform their responsibilities, need to have remote access. So it's important to remember that, again, that the access that you're granting to these contractors or vendors is only as what is needed for them in order to perform their responsibilities that they're providing to your organization under their contract. And also the biggest thing that you've probably been following out in the world is that COVID-19 has led to a lot of different phishing attacks And it's important to, as part of your security awareness training programs, to include some of these examples of schemes that might have been out there as a result of this. And then on this next slide, I've kind of outlined a few things that I've seen out in the marketplace. Fabricated notices from health organizations where they're representing themselves to be state and local health departments. Fake updates from your employer about policies or procedures to address the risk, hoping that you would click on the link and provide information that you may not normally had done before. Phony websites, including maps and dashboards, information about protecting yourself, your children, or your community that contain malicious links or attachments, and also charitable appeals to help victims of the virus, which are not legitimate. These are all some examples of some of the types of phishing schemes that hackers are trying to use to obtain information that they can use against you and your organization. Some of the impact that COVID-19 on the responsibility and execution of controls. If you had changes in the staffing in your organization, it's possible that new IT control owners won't be familiar enough with their responsibilities. Again, here it's important that we reiterate that training is important. If somebody has taken on some new role that they may not have had before due to consolidations, it's important that they receive the appropriate training in order to make sure that the controls that they're assuming that they didn't have before is being performed properly. Similar to changes in staffing, changes in personnel responsibilities or streamlining of operations could lead to segregation of duty conflicts. So we might have a person that might be performing different functions, such as the setup, the removal, the termination in systems. It's important that we have an oversight of that by the manager or person who is responsible for making sure that that's happening, especially if there's a segregation of duty issue related to that. And also finally, during the transition to remote work, some controls that may have been performed on a timely basis while they were on site may not be getting done on a timely basis. Examples of that might be removal, addition, or change of access for users within your systems, reconciliation of data, particularly if it rolls into your general ledger related to that. It's important to make sure that we have some reconciliations that are being done up to date to make sure that data that's being posted is being properly handled and corrected on a timely basis. So that's some examples of how this could, COVID-19 has had changes in your execution of controls. A couple final points. Administrator access of key systems and applications. With the impact of moving to remote access and the increased dependency on IT personnel and the infrastructure to support this, it's important that we have cross-trained IT staff to support the multiple IT activities, particularly if you have subject to segregation of duty considerations where we may only have one person performing the IT function within an organization. It's probably important that we have some sort of other backup person in order to perform that, because should there be some type of crisis or that person may not be available, it's important that you have a secondary way of getting support for your systems, IT systems and applications. Another thing to consider, if you have administrative accounts within your applications, a possible thing to consider is a password vault or some other method to enable administrative accounts to be used in a secure way if your key IT individual is not available for some reason. And lastly, it's important to consider contingency plans for IT personnel so that key controls can continue to be operated. It's particularly where segregation of duties need to be considered as part of that scenario planning. Our next presentation is going to cover contingency planning in a little bit. So I thought that might be a good segue there to go to that presentation. My last slide relates to change management. The The last slide is related to change management assistance and applications. COVID-19 has taken a increased focus of amount of time for your IT personnel, and it might result in inadequate testing of changes to making sure they're being done before it go live. One strategy that we've seen is to reduce the volume of the changes requested and just limited it to critical items only, which might be patches or updates. So it's important to continue to make sure that these are being done to keep your system secure on a timely basis. But finally, I just wanted to say that all these considerations as part of your audit are important to consider, because we will be, as part of our audit process, reviewing what COVID-19 might have had an impact on your internal controls and IT controls. And it would be proactive to review these issues ahead of time to identify any potential gaps before your financial statement audit commences at a later date. Thank you again, and I'd be open to any questions or emails. I can be reached at the contact information shown on the slide there.